Great. So welcome for those of you who are new. This is an attempt at skillfully and intuitively amalgamating non-duality with internal family systems. And the focus here is mainly on self, though parts are always welcome whenever they surface. The founder of IFS, and this is something that's often missed, something that tends to be overlooked. The founder of IFS posed that self, this is self with a capital S, appears as both a particle and a wave. And every week we seem to tune into both aspects of that. The particle, the actionable, aspect of self through the 8 C's, the being in this world. And then self as a wave, which is this transpersonal the ground of being, this primal, native, quality or essence. Within which the dance of the parts, or the play or the lila of the parts takes place, assumes this imaginative form in our inner world. So see, just as I'm saying these words here, see if there's anything here, any parts that are present that already seem to have a preference for self as a particle or self as a wave. And there might be some parts that are very grounded, very at ease with self as a particle. There's a sense of embodiment. And as I like to relate the 8 C's to the chakra points, I'm just going to run through them. Down at the root, confidence. Sacral, creativity. Solar plexus, courage. The heart, compassion. Throat, clarity. Third eye, curiosity. Crown, connectedness. And this spaciousness that can be observable within and without is the calm. So these 8 C's are very much actionable and usable in the real world. So this is when we skillfully navigate our interactions with our loved ones, or even with the people who we don't know. self as a particle really can help us to skillfully, lovingly navigate our interactions through these 8 C's and the 5 P's. And there might be parts here that really love that. They really relish being able to embody, get playful with, and maybe explore, how does self show up for you? Are there any other qualities that appear to be really present when we notice self energy? And then you might discern other parts that find it a little bit easier to attune and align with the transpersonal aspect of self. This is self as a wave. And notice if there are any here present now that are more comfortable with self as a wave. And in this moment, if I was to give a pointer for what's showing up here, is that if self as a particle is the breath, in a sort of a meditative, mindful sense, then self as a wave is the space within which the breath falls into. So it feels as though self as a wave is even closer, even more primal, even more native than self as a particle. So see if you can maybe start to discern and giving it plenty of breath. This is how self as a particle uses and utilizes the body for overall health, well-being, equanimity, harmony, balance. It utilizes the breath as a way to nourish, to bring soothing to the body, to the mind, to the parts. Hmm. Every time you can discern any sensation, any movement, like the breath entering the lungs. We're tuning into the particle. We're tuning into the being in this world. And then every time we become aware of this space, the vast open space within which the breath, the words, the thoughts, the sensations appear in, we're getting glimpses of self as a wave. Transpersonal, formless, abstract. Can't be contained, can't be measured. In a way, can't be described, can't be labeled. There seems to be a quality about self as a wave that's not of this world. It's awarenessing. And when you were born, when each of us were born, we were already born with self. And self as a wave is complete, whole, unchanging, imperturbable, indestructible. From the moment we are born until the moment we take our last breath. It remains the same. If we were to take a sample of self as a wave when you were born, and if we were to take a sample throughout the pivotal moments in your life, that sample would be the same. The quality, the essence would be the same. So we're born with this. Self as a particle although we're born with, appears to have capacity to learn with us, appears to mature. And so perhaps if we were to take a sample of self as a particle, the way it manifests within each unique finite mind, if you were to take that sample throughout your life, you may find that there's a slight change. And it would probably be related to the amount of self-leadership, the amount of self-energy that is present. So when we're born, our nervous system has to heavily rely on our caregivers because of the immaturity of self as a particle. It's not yet able to provide for us the way it does when we're adults. Whilst self as a wave quietly sits in the background, witnessing nourishing as the very ground of being that makes each of us who we are. And this feels to be the very subtle difference in between the two, that the particle aspect is somehow adaptable, actionable in the world. He seems to have a desire to bring these 8 qualities, these 8 C's: confidence, creativity, courage, compassion, clarity, curiosity, connectedness, calm. Seems to want to bring it into the world. And so if you were to imagine a scale with 0 at one end and 10 at the other end, and the ability to slide in between, back and forth, for any given part, we can have a little look and get curious about whereabouts is this part on the scale from 0 to 10. 0 meaning there's not much awareness of self, and 10 is self is always here, or the awareness of self is always here. If you were to notice if there are any parts present for you right now, just take a very quick inventory of where is this part on this sliding scale. And sometimes when we look at the wheel of self-leadership, parts can find it easier if we suggest each of the 8 C's one at a time. How tuned in are you on this scale from 0 to 10? To confidence, to creativity, to courage, to compassion, to clarity, curiosity, connectedness, and calm. And if it feels like there are any parts here who appear to be further away from the awareness of self, they seem to not have yet glimpsed that self is always here. See if you can show these parts now that there's this slider they can get curious with this slider, tuning in to self at one end and returning back at the other end. And this is how we can vacillate. This is how the parts can undulate, merge with the rest of the waves, overlapping into the totality of the ocean, and then return to their perception and felt sensation as a separate wave. See if this is something your parts might like to play with. This is what we mean when we say actionable. This ability to slide back and forth, to assume more of self, and paradoxically blend further into self, with self. See how it feels to play with that possibility of being able to vacillate, to being able to switch perception, put on different goggles, the goggles of self, the goggles of part. And where's that comfort level? Where's the comfortable zone where they feel just separate enough, but still immersed, nourished within the spaciousness of self? Where is that level of comfort for each of your parts? This is what's so beautiful about self. Although self is the primal, self is always here, it doesn't lord it over the parts. Self doesn't assume authority. It doesn't give out rules, regulations, no rights or wrongs. Self just quietly supports, either through beingness as a wave or the 8 C's as a particle. This is what I really have come to value, respect about self. It's like the perfect, ideal, trusting parent. With infinite space, infinite time, infinite trust, and unwavering knowing that parts are always safe. They're always safe because they're always held within self. Even if, like rebellious teenagers, they believe themselves to be separate. They need to experience who they are first. Self just says, yeah, go ahead. I'm here. You can't get lost. You can't go far. This is what I really have come to respect about self. It's not like an angry God that lords over parts and says, you can't do this. This is right. This is wrong. I don't like this. If you don't stop doing that, I will withdraw my love. Self has unconditional love, no matter how the parts show up. See if you can show your parts that they can be who they want to be. And self is always here for them. It isn't either or. It isn't either you behave and do as you're told. It's both and. Self rejoices in parts, in their unique wisdom, their unique vantage point of view. I've come to know self as a wave, as the Tao. It nourishes all things, loves all things, gives life to all things, but doesn't lord it over them. And there might be parts here that would quite like self to lord it over them, to be a little bit more present. See if you can show those parts access to the slider now. The barrier to awareness of self isn't emanating from self. It emanates from the parts. And so if there are any parts that are actually very keen to merge closer with self, see if you can allow them to have that autonomy to use the slider to get closer in to their comfort level. Sometimes when we come to this work, there can be some anger from the parts at self, maybe some even disbelief. Where were you when I needed you? The part might say, speaking to self. And can you see now how self was there all along? Always willing, longing, and the longing that each of us now has for self. Is the longing that self has for us and for the parts. It's all the same longing. Longing to be together, to be merged. Longing for safety of self, security, belongingness. And see if you can show your parts now that they already belong and they always have done. Wherever you go, wherever the parts go, the self's always there. And if we were to flip this notion of unblending, it would be that it is self that cannot unblend from parts, because self is primal. If you were to imagine self as the spacious open sky, parts appear and disappear, just like clouds appear and dissipate. Not totally blocking the light of self, but perhaps modulating or reducing the amount of light or energy from self that can be felt in any given moment. And just as even on a very cloudy day, if the clouds had the capacity to totally obliterate the sunlight coming from the sun, then we would have dark in the daylight. But what happens is that the clouds themselves transmit the light from the sun, just like each part is already seeded with self-energy, through which self can shine, can make its presence known. The fact that there are parts that arise within the awareness of self is not a problem for self whatsoever. Just like the fact that there are clouds in the sky is not a problem whatsoever. We see it as a natural phenomenon. We see it as something quite ordinary. How would it be to really come to know? This isn't an intellectual, cognitive knowing. I like to call this the capital K knowing. This is embodied, absolute truth knowing that the being, the ground from which you arise from, is self, that spacious openness. And then the appearance and disappearance of parts as they come and go and let us know what is moving through them is not a problem. Certainly not for self. It may be a problem for any polarized parts. Maybe a problem for any critical parts. Maybe a problem for any managers here who are attempting to keep things at bay. But the fact is that for self, it's not a problem. Self doesn't mind if it's a small white fluffy cloud that appears, or a thick heavy rain cloud, a storm cloud. Not a problem whatsoever. This is the type of knowing that we're aiming for when we initially come to the work of IFS. Initially, before we arrive at this capital K knowing, there does appear to be a necessary step to ask the parts to give us a little bit of space so that self can be glimpsed. But once we arrive at knowing, the idea of asking parts to unblend ceases to hold, ceases to make sense. Just as each of us here in this moment knows that you're naked beneath your clothes. You don't have to start taking clothes off, stripping layers off in order to prove that to yourself. You just know. This is the kind of embodied knowing that we're aiming for when we come to non-dual IFS. And when we know, then parts are not a problem for us. Because self is always visible. Self is always palpable, closer than close, closer than your breath. Just an invitation here to notice how the inner world responds to the possibility of knowing. And I want to be careful using the word knowing so as not to invoke the thinking parts, analyzing parts, meaning-making parts. The subvocal voice that we all hear inside our heads. The knowing comes from beingness. For me, it emanates deeper than my bones. I cannot place the knowing. It's as though every cell, every part, everything that I'm aware of vibrates with the energy of knowing. Once we know, being apart is not a problem whatsoever. Being apart becomes a play, it becomes a dance, an exploration. We invoke more of that creativity. And then courage to show that creativity, confidence to bring that creativity, compassion, clarity, curiosity, connectedness, calm. All these become tools for playfulness, loving playfulness. All these become tools for expressing the beauty, innocence, and perfection that is always available at the core of our being. Well, we're going to be coming to the end of the meditation soon. And I wonder if you can make your parts aware that there's going to be transition. Let them know that we're now going to join the collective self. Uniting us through the golden threads from one heart to the next, to the next. And see if you can allow yourself to take a more embodied breath in, becoming more conscious of your body on the surface you're sat on, any sounds that are present in your room. Thank you all. Thank you so much.